Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Last week, I brought a teaching about Parshat Truma, which included detailed instructions that God was giving to Moshe when Moshe is up on the mountain about the building of the Mishkan and what needs to be collected, what materials, what metals, in order to build it. It was a blueprint for the building of the Mishkan. And in fact, there's a few points in the Parsha where we learn that God actually implanted a vision of what God had in mind into Moshe's head so that he not only had verbal instructions, but he was able to see the finished product from the mind of God. Really interesting, mystical thing to read about. This week, we continue on. Moshe is still up at the top of the mountain. But this time, God is giving instructions to Moshe about Aaron, who will be inaugurated as the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and about the trappings of the priesthood and what Aaron will wear. So lots of specificity like last week in the instructions, but the focus this week is almost exclusively on Aaron. The Parsha starts out with the words Ve'ata tetzaveh. Ve'ata is and you. Aviva Zornberg translates it as and as for you, as if there was a shift away from the focus on Moshe with the instructions from last week. And now God is focused now back on Moshe with this particular set of instructions. And what's the first set of instructions? It's you shall command, which is what tetzaveh means. And the context is that Moshe is supposed to relay that God is commanding Bnei Yisrael to take pure oil in order to kindle the menorah, the Ner Tamid, the eternal lamp. What's interesting about tetzaveh to me is that up until now, all of the instructions given by God to relay to the people, including to Aaron, have been introduced by either the verb to speak or to say. But here, God tells Moshe to command the people. Normally, we associate that verb with God's speech. Commandment comes from God. But here, God is telling Moshe to command the people. So what's going on here? Is God giving additional authority to Moshe? Is this a new level of power, or is it just a different verb? So at the end, when I ask for questions or comments, maybe you can think about this question and a few other questions that I raised while I'm talking to you now. And if you've got an answer, I would love to hear it, or if you have further questions. And if you do write on Shabbos, please notate what your questions or comments are. And I'd love to hear from you at the end. Another interesting thing about this Parsha is that our sages point out that Moshe's name is completely absent. This is the only time in Torah when Moshe is not mentioned by name in Torah after he had been introduced at the beginning of Sefer Shemot. So why is that? There's a wide range of answers about why that is. Normally, later on when we read Parshat Balak, we see that Moshe is absent from the story of Balak, the non-Jewish prophet who is hired by, Balak, who is the king, who hires Bilam, the non-Jewish prophet. Their discussion goes back and forth about what Bilam can do to curse or not curse the people. So in that story, all of the action is away from Moshe. His name is not mentioned till the very end after the Balak and Bilam story is concluded. But here it's different. So one of the explanations is one that I alluded to last week, and that is that the chronology in the Torah is not the linear chronology in time as events unfold. So for example, a lot of our sages, including Rashi, and actually a majority of the sages, believe that this part of the story is being told out of order. That's starting with last week's Parsha, with the instructions to build a Mishkan, that that part of the story and this week's Parsha come in the point in time after the sin of the golden calf. So, for example, and when we do have the story of the sin of the golden calf, God tells Moshe that he's going to destroy the people and start over with him. Moshe pleads with God not to do this and to forgive the people, gives all the good reasons for why God should not do that, appeals to God's vanity, to the political implications, to how people in the future will view God if God does this, but also says at some point after the sin of the golden calf that if you do destroy all the people, then erase my name. Then blot my name out from the book. So God, in fact, does forgive the people. There are consequences, obviously, to the sin of the golden calf, but God does forgive the people. But Moshe's wish is fulfilled. And how is it fulfilled? Well, in this week's Parsha, his name is omitted. And that's the reason, by weaving those stories together, that Rashi and others think that there is a fracture in the timeline. So is this important to know what follows and what comes first and what comes last? By the way, the Ramban, Nachmanides, disagrees with this and gives his arguments for how it unfolds in the Torah is how it unfolds in our history. But regardless of what camp you fall into in any given year, and every year, my views about many things in Torah change depending upon where I am in life and what speaks to me. The better question for me is, what is each position trying to teach us? The Torah is not a history book. It's a book of instruction. An instruction book doesn't necessarily follow a linear timeline. So to me, this is about teaching us in the most effective way. So what does each position, whether it's told out of order or not told out of order, trying to teach us by advocating a different chronology? So that's something to think about as well. Another reason why Moshe's name could be absent is because we are witnessing an intimate meeting. So rather than thinking it in terms of Moshe is farther away from what's happening, I like to picture Moshe up on the mountain having this intimate meeting with God. And in fact, this event is so close and personal that God merely addresses Moshe as you rather than calling him by name. And this happens a few times, 3 times total in our Parsha, this Ve'ata and you and as for you. The interesting thing about whether or not Moshe is absent here or present or where his name is that Monday evening starts the holiday of Purim. And one of the main things that we think about when we read the book of Esther is that God's name is nowhere in that book. And so what does that mean? What does it mean when the name is absent? Does it mean the presence of the person, or that God is absent? Or is the person so close and so near that they don't need to be mentioned by name? But the association is really clear. We read this Parsha and the book of Esther around the same time. And in fact, Esther is related to the word Hester in Hebrew, which means hidden. So I think the answer to this about hiddenness and not hiddenness can be found, at least one explanation, where we are in our journey. So where are we? We are being tasked with building a Mishkan, the tabernacle, and it's supposed to be a mikdash, a holy place, setting up the priesthood, which we learn about this week, naming Aaron as the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. And with that, this is a hereditary appointment, one that will be passed along to his sons, who will also be serving with him as the regular Kohanim. We are post-revelation. We have affirmed our acceptance of the Torah and the ratification of the covenant. We have attained a new status. God promised us if we listen to everything, do what we're supposed to, pay attention to the rules and the laws, that we will be a holy nation. So we have achieved at least part of that elevated status. We have been invested with some level of holiness now. It's not just the wisdom gained from Moshe sharing the teaching with us and our experience of revelation. There's also something beyond this holiness aspect. So yes, our day-to-day needs are being taken care of. We have manna every day. We have water. Our clothes and our shoes we're taught do not wear out, never wore out. We have set up a hierarchical court system so that we can manage the normal and extraordinary disputes that come up in daily life. We have spiritually matured, even if we're still being taken care of in terms of our survival and physical needs. We have been taught many of the laws, more to come. Moshe is still up on the mountain, getting the laws and the explanations from God. But we are not merely bystanders in the infancy of our development or recipients of God's grace and providence. We are partners. We are free people with the responsibilities that freedom demands. And finally, with the instructions for the Mishkan, we are creators, and we are creating in the image of God. So back to Aaron. With the establishment of the priesthood and naming of Aaron and his sons, we also have a separation of powers, so to speak. Moshe may be at the top, Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher, our leader, our prophet, but Aaron's status now goes beyond being merely the brother of Moshe. Arguably, this entire parsha is about Aaron. So how does Moshe feel about Aaron being appointed Kohen Gadol and not him? And that's why when I was thinking of how I would title my talk, I came to the title of A Tale of Two Siblings. And also for the last part of what I'm going to share with you, A Tale of Two Creations. So this is a story of two siblings, and there's much midrash about this appointment by God of Aaron as Kohen Gadol and how Moshe must have felt about it. For example, a lot of our midrashim say that Moshe was disappointed, maybe even jealous, aggravated. There's midrash that come down on all sides of this issue. So for this, I have relied on Aviva Zornberg, who has a wonderful book on all the parshiot in Sefer Shemot called The Particulars of Rapture. And she collates many of the opinions of our sages and many of the midrashim and gives us a beautiful taste and connection between a lot of them to make certain points about the psychology behind this appointment, the appointment of Aaron as high priest, and the effect that it had not just on Moshe, but also on Aaron. So first, she spends a lot of time dissecting the opening phrase that I mentioned, the ve'ata, the and you, and as for you. She translates it as and as for you, showing the shift goes back to Moshe with this intimate conversation that he's having with God. And although in our whole parsha, as we imagine Moshe up on the mountain speaking directly with God, although we understand this to be a dialogue between God and Moshe, this is a dialogue where God does all the talking and Moshe does all the listening. Moshe does not speak during the entire parsha. Even though the subject of Aaron and priesthood dominated completely. Moshe is the focus, but Aaron is the subject. So perhaps this ve'ata, this and as for you, anticipates Moshe's own surprise at not being named Kohen Gadol himself. Maybe God is saying, I'm giving the priesthood to Aaron and his sons. But as for you, Moshe, you will continue to teach, to lead the people, and to judge. Some of our sages interpret this as a demotion or as some form of punishment to Moshe. But what would Moshe be punished for at this point? So here's some interesting midrashim about that. The midrash points to Moshe's first encounter with God at the burning bush to explain why this could be seen as a demotion or as a punishment. So if you've got a Tanakh or Chumash, you can go back there. This is back in chapter 3, verse 4, when God calls out to Moshe with Moshe, Moshe. And Moshe replies with the beautiful code word, the accepting word, hineni, here I am. But we see through the rest of the dialogue, and this indeed is a dialogue, there is a back and forth exchange between Moshe and God in this first encounter, that Moshe is anything but enthusiastic and acquiescent about this experience, about this mission that he's being given. At 3:1, after he's given the bullet points, Moshe responds, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should take the children of Israel out of Egypt? So from this, we see that Moshe anticipates that there's going to be pushback from Bnei Israel who don't know this man Moses and don't understand why he's got the pedigree to speak for God and who was God anyway. Many of Bnei Israel may think, remember these were people that are still enslaved and have become alienated and detached, many of them, from their relationship with God. So then this dialogue continues at 3:13. God answers this and says, behold, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, this is Moshe then pushing back again. When I come to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your forefathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And again, Moshe pushes back and says, but they, the people, will not believe me, and they will not heed my voice, for they will say, Hashem did not appear to you. And finally, his last argument to God is at 4:10, when he says, please, Hashem, I am not a man of words, not since yesterday, not since the day before yesterday, nor since you first spoke to your servant, for I am heavy of mouth and heavy of speech. Actually, the word is lashon, which also means tongue, heavy of mouth, heavy of tongue. So interestingly, this phrase for heavy of mouth and heavy of speech, kavad peh and kavad lashon, both use this word kavad, which is commonly translated as heavy and does mean heavy. But kavad is also related to the word kavod, which means honor or gravitas and implies something of significance. The implication of heaviness, which Moshe means as a detriment, is eventually converted to a positive attribute, which we see is on full display in Sefer Devarim at the end of the Torah, when we meet a Moshe who is in full command of his mouth, of his tongue, of his speech, of his language, and gives this final last will and testament to the people, recounts their whole story, their struggles, and many of the laws. So we see his evolution from a person who has no confidence in his own ability to speak or persuade to a man in full confidence. Interesting that this word kavad, related to kavod, then can be applied to the later Moshe, whose words carry great weight and importance. So God argues again with Moshe about his ability to convey these important messages in words. He says, I have made a man with a mouth. It's I who will enable you to speak. But Moshe offers one final demur to the mission. This is at 4:13 at the beginning of Sefer Shemot, and says, please, Hashem, send through whomever you will send, which we interpret to send anyone on this mission but me. And at this point, God gets angry, his anger flares, and he says that he will have Aaron join in the project and act as Moshe's mouthpiece, literally, saying, Aaron will be in your mouth and you will be his leader. So that's pretty much the whole back and forth discussion of Moshe and God at the burning bush, with the mission being given to Moshe. So what has this got to do with any type of demotion or Moshe being punished and not being given the priesthood? Our sages say that because of this exchange and Moshe's objections and continued objections, they argue that this was why he was not given the priesthood. This arguing back and forth with God and not trusting that God knew that Moshe had the ability to carry out the mission is one of the reasons why the priesthood was withheld from him. And why is this important? The other issue is psychologically, can we detect any type of disappointment or anger or resentment from Moshe from being excluded from this honor? And the answer is no. There's no ill feeling. Moshe certainly doesn't question God. Why haven't you given it to me? Although there are some midrashim where there is a dialogue constructed of exactly that. And that's an interesting dialogue as well. And I'm going to share one midrash about that. Also, we do not detect any jealousy from Moshe with respect to his brother Aaron. He also doesn't ask God about any concern for why his children, his male children, would then be excluded. Perhaps Moshe is not concerned that the honor doesn't go to him, but knowing that it is a hereditary appointment, he may feel that there is a disappointment that his own sons would not be sharing in this honor and have this elevated status and these duties. But in Torah, Moshe never raises these points. And what does that mean to me? It just solidifies his position as the most humble of men. Now, shifting to Aaron, we also wonder psychologically what was going through his head when he finds out that all of this attention from God was given to his younger brother. After all, Aaron is the older, Moshe is the younger. Did he feel jealousy at all about not being called into action directly by God, like Moshe's experience at the burning bush? So the Midrash also anticipates this issue between siblings, and fills it in as follows. I'm going to read from the Midrash. This is Aviva Zornberg's translation of a very fun Midrash. On the quotation from the Torah of, please Hashem, send by the hand of someone else, which I spoke about, the Midrash says, this should be interpreted as, you will cause, meaning you, God will cause my brother, this is Moshe speaking, you will cause my brother to resent me since he is the elder, and yet you send me on this mission. And God responds in this Midrash, as you live, you are right that he is older than you. Nevertheless, he will see you and rejoice in his heart. It's a beautiful image that Aaron's response to hearing about this exchange between God and Moshe at the burning bush is that he will only have joy, will only be happy for his brother. So the proof text for this issue of Aaron rejoicing is also found at the end of the burning bush story, when God finally relents and includes Aaron in the mission. Right after that, we read, behold, this is at 4:14, behold, Aaron is going out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will rejoice in his heart. From this, our sages interpret that Aaron merits the honor of the priesthood. In fact, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who you may know because he is supposed to be the author of the Zohar. So he's a famous rabbi. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, that same heart that rejoiced in the greatness of his brother, let precious stones be set upon it, as it is said, and Aaron shall bear the names of the Israelites on the breastplate upon his heart. So here we have a line lifted directly out of our Parsha this week, that this whole idea of Aaron rejoicing in his brother's behalf, rejoicing on his heart. For that, he also merited wearing the Choshen, the breastplate that had the stones representing the 12 tribes over his heart, part of the vestments that we read about in our Parsha this week. There's also a connection there to this idea of rejoicing, and also further evidence of Aaron meriting the priesthood. Here's another midrash talking about the sibling relationship. And this, again, is per the translation of Aviva Zornberg. Moshe told Aaron, God has instructed me to appoint you high priest. And Aaron replied, you have labored so hard on the Mishkan, and I am made high priest? This is a midrashic dialogue between Moshe and Aaron. And Moshe replies, as you live, even though you have become high priest, it is as though I had become high priest. Just as you rejoiced when I rose to greatness, so I rejoice in your greatness. This is one of my favorite midrashim, not only because it shows two brothers who only want the best for each other without a scintilla of jealousy or schadenfreude, but because this is such a departure of everything that we've read about siblings in Torah up till now. To me, this is a beautiful tikkun for all the problematic sibling relationships, starting with Cain and Abel, and continuing in each generation, huge problems, all the way most recently with Joseph and his brothers. So now we have Moshe and Aaron, and almost without exception in Torah, there's a little problem that we come across down the road between Moshe and Aaron and Miriam, which I won't talk about now. But for the most part, when you think of a 40-year journey and a 40-year relationship between siblings, almost without exception, Moshe and Aaron work together beautifully. They understand that they each have a special role to fulfill. They each have different attributes. They complement each other beautifully. So they work together. And what do they work together to accomplish? Well, first, to lead Bnei Yisrael out of Egypt and into freedom, and then to share the leadership in the Midbar for the 40 years that we are in the desert. For much of what I'm going to share with you now, I relied on a beautiful essay from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs that I'm sure you're all familiar with. He has a wonderful series called Covenant and Conversation, which are his weekly thoughts on the Parsha. I'm speaking of him in the present tense. We all know that unfortunately he passed away fairly recently, but we have a wonderful library of his Parsha thoughts, and I found an essay from a few years back where he cites a midrash based on a line from a psalm, and this is Psalm 85, and the line is, "Loving kindness and truth meet together, righteousness and peace kiss each other." Loving kindness and truth meet together, righteousness and peace kiss each other. We have the image of these four wonderful qualities that may be polarized in some situations. Loving kindness does not always mesh well with truth. Righteousness does not. Righteousness and peace don't always mesh well either. Sometimes they're opposing forces. but we have this beautiful image of them, of these two pairs coming together. And there's a midrash that connects and expands this pasuk from the Psalm in relation to Moshe and Aaron, beautiful, that I wanted to share with you. Loving kindness, this refers to Aaron. Truth, this refers to Moshe. Righteousness, this refers to Moshe. And peace, this refers to Aaron. So Rabbi Sacks goes on to say that Moshe and Aaron were quite different in temperament and role. Moshe was the man of truth, Aaron was the man of peace. Without truth, there can be no vision to inspire a nation, but without internal peace, there is no nation to inspire. So Aaron and Moshe were both necessary. Their roles were in creative tension, yet they worked side by side, each respecting the distinctive gift of the other. As the Midrash goes on to say, and he kissed him, it refers to Moshe and Aaron kissing when they first met up after Moshe's burning bush experience, and means that they each rejoiced at the other's greatness. Rabbi Sacks continues, just as Aaron made space for his younger brother to lead, so the Torah makes space for Aaron to lead. That is why Aaron is the hero of Tetzaveh for once, not overshadowed by Moshe. The second part of my title for today's talk is a tale of two creations. And the reason why I gave that as a subtitle is because there's many parallels that have been identified by our sages between God's creation story back in Breshit and the creation of the Mishkan and everything related to it, including the assignment of Aaron to be Kohen Gadol and all of the clothing investments that go with that. If we go back to the beginning of our Parsha, when God tells Moshe to command Bnei Yisrael regarding the oil for the Ner Tamid, Moshe, to me, is inhabiting a divine role of command, enables the people to bring their own version of Yehi Or, let there be light. So to me, the beginning of this Parsha then is a commandment for the people to join in their own creation of light here on earth. Beautiful parallel with God's statement of Yehi Or. There's many other parallels. When the work is finished, for example, at the end of Sefer Shemot, the work in the Mishkan, we read, Moshe saw the entire work, and behold, the people had done it as Hashem had commanded, so they had done. And this to me corresponds with God's creation story in Breshit, when we read, thus the heaven and the earth were finished and all their array. Here we read all the work of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting was completed, and the children of Israel had done everything that Hashem had commanded Moshe. Back in Breshit, we read, by the seventh day, God completed his work, which he had done. And in Sefer Shemot, we read, so Moshe completed the work. In Breshit, God blessed the seventh day because on it he abstained from all his work, which God had created to make. And here in Sefer Shemot, Moshe saw the entire work, and behold, they had done it as Hashem had commanded, so they had done, and Moshe blessed them. In Breshit, God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. In our story here, you shall take the anointment oil and anoint the tabernacle and everything that is in it and sanctify it and all its utensils, and it shall become holy. There's also parallels between, more parallels with the number 7. The obvious one is God created the world in 7 days, and the inauguration of the priesthood is a 7-day period. God created the world in 7 days, Also, and another parallel with that is that we're introduced to this menorah at the beginning of our parsha, which has 7 branches and holds 7 candles, 7 lights. Aaron also wore 7 sacred vestments, all the accoutrement that went with the trappings of being Kohen Gadol. The completion of the Mishkan was on one of the New Year days that we celebrate, and the completing the creation of the world is literally the beginning of the world. A new year, a new beginning. 7 kinds of substances were collected for the building of the Mishkan: metals, skins, wood, oil, spices, yarn, and gemstones. This signifies that everything in the material world created by God was used for us to create our miniature world for God, which was the Mishkan. This is not an exhaustive list of comparisons, just a taste of it. Some other interesting relationships between the creation of the world and our creation of the Mishkan, that when we read about God creating the universe, it's a mere 34 verses. The creation of the Mishkan in our Torah spans 5 parshiot and hundreds of verses. So obviously we're not as, we don't have the the concision of vision and the precision of what we need to do. We're not, we struggle a little bit in our creation, whereas God can merely speak the world into creating. We have to figure out how to do things and perhaps learn a trade. And so we're not as efficient as God. But regardless, both are selfless acts. It's a really interesting way to look at this issue of creation, especially when we know how things turn out. So why do I say it's a selfless act on the part of God? Because we're going to cause God a lot of heartache. At the end of the very first Parsha, we read about God's having regretted having made man, that unfortunately being invested with this quality of free will and free choice, there's a lot that we do that is not righteous, not true, not good, not moral. We make mistakes. There is room in this place that God created for us for evil. So to me, the selfless act of God having created us means that God knows that there's going to be heartache and disappointment, and why make room for something when you know it's going to cause you pain and problems? Well, every parent can answer that question. When we create a child, we know that there is going to be pain and disappointment, and since we're all mortal, eventually death. But the whole idea of being able to create and give life overtakes us in a way that pushes out the other concerns. And to me, same for God creating a space here for us. Why a selfless act for us? Well, it was a lot of labor, and the purpose was so that God could have a space to dwell here. In this way, we emulate God. We are B'Tselem Elohim. We are in the image of God. We have aspired to occupy a place worthy of the partnership. This reflects our acceptance of Torah. We've created this visual space that we can relate to, a forever reminder of God's presence, not only with us, but within us. Shabbat Shalom. I've concluded my talk.